precursor, and we're live streaming. Cool. So this is a precursor to recording a more informational session about Wardley mapping and how I use it to think about direction and where we're heading. So we're using this kind of Wardley mapping template, which is fun and a little complex. And I think am I sharing the whole screen or just the application?
Yeah, you're sharing the whole screen.
I think the whole screen.
I hope you're, linearly more productive.
Widescreen and very high resolution, so it can be challenging at times.
Okay, I can see this. I can't read the stickies, but I see the canvas.
Yeah, so we're going to go through this exercise, by which time we should end up with a map which helps us to visualize, where our components are in space. One of the most important things to start with when you look at it is the kind of North Star and your purpose. In the scalability group that we're targeting for this kind of mapping exercise today, we have, a purpose that is holistic and horizontal, but, mainly centers around keeping GitLab.com and expanding to other SaaS platforms soon, operating successfully at scale. So we do that in a few ways. We swarm around critical incidents. We prevent a lot of disaster through investigation and forecasting. General experts in architecture and infrastructure and help facilitate some of those discussions. And our frameworks team within scalability are focused on giving teams tools to scale their features successfully and kind of self-serve as they get into million user scale environments. This is important with Wardley mapping, so you don't try and eat the world and drink the ocean, right? To scope what you're trying to map quite explicitly. So scalability do look at capacity planning, critical saturation response, and horizontal scaling as part of their remit, but we're not going to cover that today and in this mapping exercise. And we're going to scope it to scaling the software development practices at GitLab and look a bit at the development lifecycle and the feature lifecycle, how application limits specifically relate to that, and then to broaden that and make it a bit real, what the work needed to operate GitLab.com, pardon me, at scale is. So
one question, sorry, I have a barking dog outside. So I think tightly scoping is really important. And here, the way I think about it is application limits are very relevant to scaling software development practices at GitLab. So this is why they come together. You wouldn't want to have separate themes here, right? You want it to be focused, but all of those three things relate to each other quite tightly.
Yes, and the thing we're trying to set up here in the scope is almost the user journey. And it's slightly different because in this scope, you're thinking as almost the feature journey as it is built, deployed, and then scaled across GitLab.com. And we're trying to set that up a bit here in our scoping exercise. So the next thing, in something that's really important and a core of Wardley maps is framing the exercise around your users, right? It's an interesting position. And, one of the things that is important in GitLab is dog fooding, and we use our own tools. But being a horizontal team, we support lots of different users. And as we look at those users' needs, we've just kind of scoped the basic jobs to be done, almost top level function of these kind of users, right? So our GitLab.com users, they just really want to use GitLab.com. Engineers want to build features, release them to users, and our SREs, not just on the scalability team, but scalability team also want to keep GitLab.com running and scale it. We have other stuff in kind of PMs and customer success, but those are maybe out of scope for the things we explicitly scope today. So we're going to focus on these ones in the red boxes.
That's good.
And then we get into the value chain. So value chain is a kind of exercise on, so for those users and those needs, what are the activities and underlying systems that really help those needs to be fulfilled, give value to those end users? So GitLab engineers want to build features that are deployed to gitlab.com, and our SREs want to keep it running and scaled so that customers can get the value out, right? In order to build the features, we need to write code, fix bugs, and in that we have, business logic and tests that help power that. This is not meant to be an exhaustive list, but more representative of the key things that make that up.
The way I understand it is, if you ask an engineer, what they really want to do is create value for our users through building features, they will not answer, my purpose is to write tests. Right? Yes. That is something that I hope so. And so the visibility goes low, and you go essentially down the stack to the more foundational things that underpin the more visible aspects.
Yes, totally. And your visible value that you give to your end users and your kind of vision sit right in the visible, height of the y-axis, and the more things that underpin that sit in the invisible nature. The user can't see or appreciate them, but they're still foundational to creating the value.
Yep.
And scoped on application limits. So we've got kind of the scaling. The activities we want to do in the frame of mind or application limits are probably control the use of features, create exceptions, and monitor the stuff to make sure it's happening. So our value chain has that vertical axis, which is important for understanding how those features build to, or those activities build to value. And what we can do next is move to a Wardley map. And the distinction between a Wardley map is it takes the value chain and plots it along this horizontal axis. And the horizontal axis here, you can think of as an evolving, set of a feature and an evolving maturity of a feature. As something moves into the commodity section from the Genesis section, it is more able to be utilized, purchased off the shelf. A good example is kind of server racks and computers that you'd have to custom build in the 70s, moving into data centers that you could purchase. And now the commodity is cloud computing that you can sign up to, pay some dollars, and it just kind of works without very much interference. In kind of this scale is the things at the moment that we custom build. And just because we've got a couple of minutes left, we can talk about this in a little more detail. But one of the things about this map that's interesting is the potential for evolution and how that helps with choosing direction. So right now, our application limits are very custom. We instrument, as we can see in this example, a lot of different things in a custom way that's not scalable. And we end up building specific limits for each of these things. That puts us in a space where we're investing very heavily, a lot of time, a lot of cost in making these things. And we have an opportunity to commoditize the way we do application limits. Through a common interface, through great docs, and commoditizing how we implement application limits at GitLab unlocks new functionality and new kind of emerging practices. And it moves this controlling the use of features away from a after deployment on the right-hand side expensive task, shifts it left into the, development, early stage left shifted kind of the software development lifecycle. So hopefully that should mean we're able to implement and control the use of features, cheaper, earlier, and that will help to make our features more sustainable and make scaling GitLab.com much easier. Last thing to touch on, there is some inertia that will stop us from doing this, because that may look like more work and more cost earlier on in the process, but actually that cost early on in the process is multiplicative in savings down the line in effort and complexity. So
thank you so much. I know we're almost out of time, but I think what is interesting here to me is that this notion of evolution, and I think that ties in quite well with our iteration value, because you're not going to do one thing and shift application limits from custom into commodity, but it's a journey, right? You're going to move it step by step over there until it becomes a commodity. I think that's something that we need to define. But thank you so much for the overview. I think that was an excellent explanation of a Wardley map, and I hope it's useful.